try making this a little bit bigger. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see our node graph this way. So maybe what we can try doing is just pulling the node graph out and kind of putting it up there with our properties. So we can still see our node graph over here on the right, but now we can give a lot more room to our actual composite, because this is what we're wanting to be able to look at right now and see really what needs blurring. So this image right here feels way too crisp because of its edge. So I'd like to add a little bit of blur to that. And that one right now is plugging into our main shot with our scene. So let's go ahead and just kind of treat it the way we've treated some of these other pieces and merge it in. It's going to be in front of pretty much everything but the rock. Or really it's kind of at the same level as that, but technically if we made it really big, we would want it to obscure. So we would want it to be in front of everything but the rock, which would merge it in right about here in our node tree. So let's add another merge node, and we'll want to go into our node graph for that, just like this. And then we'll add another scanline render. Just got to jump back over to the node graph. It's a little bit annoying, but we can make it work. And this is the far left formation. So we'll disconnect from the scene, and you can see how that kind of just leaves a big blank space there. We'll plug it into the scanline render. Our camera pipe will need to plug into the camera, which it's going to start getting a little bit messy, but not terribly. And then we want to plug the merge into the scanline render node. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and add a dot node by holding Control and just kind of cleaning that up as best we can. And now it looks the same, but now we have access to that 3D data after it's been flattened and separately, so we can blur it. So I'll go ahead and hit the Tab key and we'll type in blur. And we'll add that blur node after our scanline render. And we'll jump back over to our properties, and you can start to come in here and blur this. Now that looks like way too much blur, especially considering that those look close to the same distance apart. So let's just add about 1 pixel of blur to that. Not a lot, but it's enough to start breaking up that edge. Maybe 1.5, much better. Okay, so that's kind of what I want to do throughout some of these pieces here. Now, some of them we can blur actually before they even go in if we're just doing it for depth of field and not for any of the reasons like the geometry itself. So like in this case, the geometry looks fine right there. I'm not feeling like the geometry is causing any kind of hard edges like it was over here. So on this one and this one, we could blur it before the fact if we want a little bit more depth of field. So we can jump back over to our node graph. And those are going to be our 2 background pieces. So these right here. So I would just want to blur here and here. So let's hit the Tab key, and really we'll just want to continue to kind of bump through just like that, and I can just copy and paste that by hitting Control-C, Control-V. Just dropping that in there. It's going to give me a second to calculate the displacement because we're doing that. So if you have that issue, just give it a second, because we're adding something that's changing that original image where it's getting its displacement from. And then we'll want to go into our properties, and for this one I'm going to add a 2.5. So that's going to be for the background right, the really far away one. Or actually, it looks like this is 5 and this is 6, so this is the one we added second. So this is the one we want the 2.5 on, and this one will want a 2. And again, it's going to cause you to recalculate that. Looks like if I just kind of click away, it allowed me to just not really have to bother with that. Now I am getting a little bit of a strange issue up here, so that may be something we want to deal with kind of at the end when we're doing some cleanup. And we may want to blur in this area over here as well. Not a lot, but just enough. So let's kind of take that into consideration. This one we're going to want to blur after the fact, because we want to blur in these areas here and not just the image. We want to actually blur what we're getting out of this, kind of these edges. So it's going to be easier if we do that after the roto. So we'll want to pull that one out of our scene as well. So that is going to be the far right side, far right formation. So we'll just unplug that from our scene. We want to grab all those associated nodes, kind of pull that up, and we don't want to take that one with us though. So we'll leave that little dot node where it was. And I'm just going to kind of pull this over to the side like that. Now we're starting to run into, you know, a little bit of an issue here in that we want to merge this in, and it's going to need to go as early as possible because we want it behind all of as many things as we can. So let's go ahead and we'll just kind of start figuring that out together. So we'll add a scanline render, and we'll drop the object scene pipe onto our geo. We'll still plug the camera into our same old trusty camera we've been using, and then we'll get ready to merge it in. So actually it might be better on this side over here. That might be a little bit easier to see. So let's just see what happens if we do it right here, right after that scanline render. So I'll add in a merge node. We'll just drop that on there and then plug into this one right here. So you can see that's the camera that's going into that scanline render. So that's why it kind of looks like it's going up in that way. So we probably should pull this down so that's still going to be pointing down and not be confusing. And you can see we're getting a little bit of an issue because that is now on top of this piece. So we'll have to merge in those other pieces if we want to be able to handle it in that way. So it's really up to you if you want to go through and change all of these to no longer be plugging into the scene so that you have individual control over their edge blurring. Let's just see what it looks like if we try to blur it the same way we did with the other ones. Just for the sake of time and not having to totally destroy our node tree, if we still feel like it looks pretty good, then we can try sticking with that. We are going to have the displacement calculation issue. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at that in our properties bin. And let's just try a 1 pixel blur on that. Again, our displacement will need recalculation. Let's actually go in and disable the displacement for now just so we can see the change, and then we'll re-enable it. So I'm just going to select that and hit the D key. And we'll come in here, and I'm just going to start cranking that up. Doesn't seem to be making a big difference, but we are waiting. There we go. So you can see what I mean, how it's just going to blur the pixels, but it's not going to blur the rotoscope because it's coming before. That's why this is so important to do after the fact with that scanline render. So there's really no way of getting around it. Sometimes you can kind of fake it a little bit, but it's really just not exactly what we need. So because of that, we will just need to go ahead and blur it from here to here instead of up here. So I'm just going to plug that back in the way it was before, and we'll just need to go in and kind of start reorganizing our tree with our blur nodes taken into consideration so that we can get those nice edges that we're looking for that aren't so hard. So we'll need to go in and re-merge these aspects in. These two things can still be plugged into the scene, but everything else is going to need its own scanline render. So let's come in the next lesson and continue working